So in the last video, we'd done all of these pages and we mentioned we need to finish them off and you guys should be able to do it. Now I've come to do the save drawings as, and we've made this checkbox list here. And then I've instantly realized there's a bit more complexity to this side than I thought. So you guys are probably going to want to see how we do it. I haven't done it yet, but I've got it implemented from our current code and you can see there's already problems. So let's just take a quick look. So the first issue we have is when we checkbox, we're not getting the edited value here. Even if we save, so let's say put some numbers in, save, go back and forward, you can see it's lost. So there's some issue here with this binding and how it's working. If we take a look at how we've done it at the minute, there's also another problem, and it's quite obvious that when I've come to bind it and realize we're binding to a string, what do we bind the isChecked to? So that was like my first kind of, oh yeah, something's wrong with the way we're saving this data. So we go to the actual model and we scroll up, you can see we basically got a list of strings, which is all we need. But in terms of a view model, the string is no good to us really, because we need a way to easily bind it to the view as opposed to making the view more complex. So instead of making this view more complicated, we'll edit the view model. So the first thing we're going to do is change this to a key value pair. So we have something to bind to. The key is going to be the name and the Boolean can be the value, whether it's checked or not. And then we'll have to convert that afterwards if we build to the data model. So when we go back down to a data model, we want to select from here only the ones that are true. So when they're selected as a value, we will select them. And then it's expecting a list, so that should be fine. Select on the value, where. So where the value is true, and then select the key. That will give us then the data model getting the checked items, but the view model having what it needs. And then to view model, we need to do the opposite. So this is going to be a bit more complicated because we have a view model that wants every export format, but the data model is only going to have so many. So we'll need to pass in an observable collection of, yeah, that's correct, string, key value pair, string booleans as export format. And then what we can do is we could say we're going to have to, I think, select on it again. So we're going to have to do a select to get every item. We're going to have to make another new one. We'll pass in the key, which is the string, and then the value now. Let's just pass in true a minute. Get rid of this. And do dot to list. Or in fact, not to list. This is a observable collection. So this will just be a new. And then inside of here, that will new up an observable collection. This will need to be probably a key value pair so it knows what it is. There we go. So what we have now is we have the full list we can pass in. We're going to reselect it and remake it at the minute exactly the same, but then set them all to checked. So now instead of setting them all to checked here, we can do the data model dot export formats, and if any of them in there have a value that matches the key, we know it's selected and it will make this true. And it will be the f dot key. And now we have two more build errors, which are the to view model now here needs to pass in that export list, and we're on the actions page where it is. So that's the drawing, save drawing formats. That's what it is, not save drawing list. It's not a key value pair, which it shouldn't be. So I've made that wrong. This wants to be just an observable collection of strings passed in, and then we don't need to select on the key now. The key is just the only thing we're passing in. And then one other issue here now. When we are making a new drawing, this wants the key value pair, string boolean, and now this is complaining again. This is an observable string, and this wants a true or false where none of them are going to be checked by default. So what we'll do is select, and then we'll do a new key value pair. We'll select with f as the key, and none of them are checked. There we go. So now we should have a way in here to bind the isChecked to, and you can see we've got a key value pair. So we will want the value, which is the Boolean, and this wants to be the key. And now they're all checked apparently. which these should be non-checked. Maybe we just need to delete and re-add the jobs. Maybe they've just automatically saved with the model changing. So let's just delete that, make a new one. There we go. So we just need to remake, save that. And now if we tag, we're still getting no updates for here. Does it save? Nope, so nothing's working still. So let's just try and solve this problem first. Why checking this is not firing off any event. So let's just bind. Let's see if the binding's working. Let's set this to the value. And then we'll run and see if, when we check the box, is it actually setting the value. So then we go to actions, model. No, so the binding isn't working there. And that is what I suspect will be because we're using a key value pair. And obviously a key value pair is just a class with a key and a value that you can set. But the value itself here doesn't have any view model style attributes. So this is never going to fire any events when we're changing the key and the value. They're just normal getters. So I think what we're going to have to do is make a new class and we'll call this key value view model. And then we'll just make this inherit from the view model base. And we will have then a private string key. Actually, we want to make this generic so you can pass anything in. So we'll have t key t value. And this will be t key is key and t value is value. Partial class. This can now be an observable property. And we'll just do an override onto string to help with debugging so we can see easier. This can just be a key and a value. And that'll just help with the debugging side. And now everywhere we have this key value pair, we're going to replace it with the key value view model. So if we start there and just follow the errors, we should be able to just copy and paste and replace. So let's just build now and see where it takes us. Obviously wants to go to the view model. Here, this is still wanting. There we go, there's another one. And we don't have a constructor, so we're going to have to add the constructor. In fact, let's just do it as a constructor up here. String key, string value. And then just set them here. Oh yeah, not string, sorry. The generics, key and value. There we go. So now I presume at least the binding should work. So go back to actions, drawing model. There we go. So now the binding's working on them. Let's change that view now back to the key as the content. And you'll notice we still didn't get the actual change saying, you know, save change or not, but we've got the binding working at least in that part. And I think what we're dealing with here is fairly obvious in one way. We have this collection, and one, we're not monitoring for the collection changing. If we add and remove items, we're not monitoring. But even though we obviously have items in the list, we're not actually removing anyway at the minute. It's a static list, so it's never going to fire the collection changed. But that would be one problem if we were. If we were going to add to this list, it still wouldn't notify the change. It's only going to notify if the entire list changes. And we can see this where we did a collection changed hook. So here, this kind of hook is what we had to do. Every time the print list changed, we hook in, and then we fire off the property changed. So this kind of logic as well is what we're having to do as like a workaround to collections and wanting to notify that something in the view has changed. So let's just do it manually first, and then I think we really need to make an extension method to support this easier. Otherwise, it's going to be a lot more work. So we'll change this to, we'll cut that out. We'll have a private collection here, and then we're going to have a public one. So we'll have a public observable collection of key value view models, string boolean. This will be export formats. We'll have the getter being the formats and the setter. Now we can do whatever we want, which is typically setting the value. And in here, what you'd normally do first is check if the value is the same as the export formats. You'd return. You don't update if it's not changed. Then you update the value. And then after this, we can now do something. So on here, we typically call on property change. So this is now exactly the same as what we had before, just adding these elements here, other than the fact we don't call has changed. So then to call has changed, we'd also do this. And now this is identical to what we had before, no better off. But every time the list gets set, we can do something. So that's probably where we need it, to be honest. Every time we set the entire list, we hook into everything we need. So let's solve the first problem, which will be we need to hook into the export formats.collection change like we did the other one. We don't care about if it'll let me do this without IntelliSense interrupting. In here now, we will want to do, let's think about this. We want to basically call the same things again. So we want to do that. And instead of copying and pasting, let's just make a function. So we'll just do an inline function here. Change delegate. We don't need any inputs. That can be there. And then now in there, we can invoke the change delegates like that. And then we can just call it again here. So what we're doing is every time we set the list, we fire off the events for this has changed and has changed has changed. And then also if the collection changes, we fire it off. So if we run this, I don't think it's going to fix anything for us at the minute because, as I mentioned, this never gets hit more than once. So if we keep a breakpoint on there, then we go to actions, drawings, you can see it gets set the first time as it initializes, and that's those two jobs. And then changing this never fires the collection changed because it's not actually a collection that's changed, it's a property inside of a collection. So I think the only real way to solve this one is if we change the collection so an item gets added. Now let's do it one way first. So the next step we need to do is for every property in the list at this point in time, so in export formats, and we need to check if it's a type. We don't want to do all the types. We want if it's a type of view model base, so that we know we're only hitting up all of the properties inside of this. So this will go into the export formats list, which is a key value view model. And inside the key value view model, it's going to find these properties. So it's going to know that these, or effectively this, is a view model base. So this is going to find the key value model inside. And then once we find that, we can again hook into the property changed of this class. So this property changed here is the property changed of this class ultimately. So when one of these two changes, which we now know fire, we can do the same thing again, plus equals, ignore everything and fire off the same event. So we shouldn't need that. Now this should fix our issue because now when the property changes, which we know it does, it's going to fire off a change to say not only has the property inside the class changed, but the export formats has changed, and also the has changed has changed. So this should solve the problem. So we go to actions, drawings, there we go. So now if we check, does it actually work though? Save, come back in. Yeah, so that seems to have fixed it fully. Now, there's a caveat here. We can't delete at the minute. We don't have an option to delete or add in this list. But if we did, what's going to happen is the collection change is going to fire. But then the new property won't have this hook on. So when the new property's property changes, it won't actually monitor. So what we need to do to solve that is go into here. We probably then want to unhook all properties in case we're double hooking. We don't want double hooks. So we can say for all of the properties in here. And now here we're actually going to have a problem because what we've done here is made a new event at this point doing this and then fired this. So instead of a change delegate, what we'll have is a var property changed delegate. We'll have to make one for each. This can equal what we were doing here because we need a solid reference to it. And then we can't do the discard yet because what we need to do is make sure we're handling or giving this. So we need an object and a property changed event handler. So we'll have to do a specific property changed event handler. And then this will have to be, I believe the, what was it? String object question mark and property changed event handler. So object sender, there we go. We make the full event. And then this at the end, and then a semicolon. There we go. And now, yep, that's an easier one. Is it suggesting? And now what we want to do is hook into this instead of doing that. And that will hook into the property. And then when we come to remove here, we can just do minus equals and the same thing. And it's always the same reference then. So we're not going to end up with double references. Once we've removed them all, we want to re-add them. So we can do that in the same loop. And this just ensures that we are not double hooking to existing properties. We could monitor the values in here and actually look for added and removed, but for how quick this will be for now, we'll just leave it like this. And then the change delegate now, we'll probably do the same thing. So a collection change delegate. So we'll just copy and paste once more. This will be a collection changed event args. And this can be collection change delegate. Not event args, event handler. There we go. And then we'll use that for the hooking in. And that will actually be this. So move that into there now. And then that will be that. And then we hook this finally into here. And that doesn't like it. Notify collection changed event handler. So it's just notify. There we go. That's the right type. That's hooked in. And then finally, we're repeating this 3 times. And considering we're not using them, we could just invoke property changed. So we're not repeating ourselves. Like that. And then at least we're not repeating the code. If we want to change this logic, we're doing it once. So that's quite a complicated little setup in a way, and we certainly don't want to do this for every single list if this works. So let's just check this still works. And then if it does, we definitely need to make this into a kind of helper function. We don't want to have this kind of level of copy and pasting again. But if it works, we have a way to monitor for the changes in a list. Oop. Yeah, so that's working fine. What's this suggesting to local function? Okay, we'll go with a suggestion for that one. So the last step is we want to make this into some kind of helper function. So if we want to make an observable collection that really does observe everything, like every property change inside makes the whole UI update at the single point of a change, we have this custom has property changed here. That's not standard. So we're going to have to also pass in a list of properties that we want to fire a change event for. So let's start with just making an extension method. And we'll call this, I guess, collection extensions. We'll make it static. We'll make this public static void. We'll call it set and observe everything, I think, because that's basically what we want to do. We'll need to pass in the type of collection, so the observable collection. And then what we want to call it on is, it's going to have to be called on a view model base, because when we're calling property changed, that we need to, it's part of the parent's view model base. So we need to be hooked into this view model itself. So we'll probably make the extension method work on the view model base, not the collection. So we'll do this view model base and we'll call it parent. And then we'll have the observable collection second as the type of T. And we'll call this value because it's going to be the same as the value here. When we pass it in, we're going to pass that value in. We also need to pass in the existing value because it won't know about it. So we've got the initial value, and we've also got an observable collection for the existing. So now we have both of them. And then as we mentioned, we're going to have to pass a list of strings in order to know what to fire for these changed events. Otherwise, it's not going to be a generic class. So for that, we'll do params because it's the last parameter, and we'll just do a string array. And then this can be property changed names. So that should be all we need to do something. If we cut all of this away, so the plan is to not have to do any of that, we should be able to then call this dot, and we should have that helper now set and observe everything, which we do. So it's going to pass in this. Now it's expecting the value, which is value. the existing, which will be the export formats. And then what else did we need? The names. So the first one will be name of, and then it's this export formats. And the second one is the name of has changed. So they're going to be the two strings. And now inside of here, if we paste everything we had, we should just have to patch this in. So value is right, export formats becomes existing. So if we just underscore call this export formats, so it matches in, and then press F2 and rename it back to existing. That will patch the code underneath. Control dot on this. And this now on property changed, we need to call on property changed, but we need to call it on the parent. So it'll be parent on property changed, and you can't actually do that. It's now called raise on property changed. And then we need the strings. So you can't pass in the caller because that would then pass in this. But we want to pass in the list of property names. So instead of doing that, we just want for each var property name changed in them parent.raise property name change. So that'll fire off all the events. And I think everything else looks like it hooks in. Oh, this is not going to work, existing. Is that why it's got an underscore kind of warning us? Wondering whether that's what the underscore is. This is trying to set a value, but it's passed in and we need it to be a reference, so we can actually override the value. And this can then be a ref. I know it's got nothing to do with the underscore then, but that should now be all generic. And what's the problem now? Cannot use ref prime inside existing local function. What we'll do is get this list first, and these properties, the only downside here is if the existing, yeah, that'll actually never change because it's a class, so we should be fine. So var properties equals, and then we'll get all the properties here, and now we can loop the properties there. So does that work? And if so, anywhere we want to make a collection, but when anything inside of it changes, and it's obviously got to still be view models, so the things inside still have to honor view models to fire off their own notification changed. But anytime then the inner items change or the collection changes, it fires off not only a property changed, but also any custom properties. This makes it more reusable for anywhere else in the app. So let's see if this now still works. So we have actions, drawing. Yes, that's looking good. So now whenever we're changing the properties, save, go between it remembers, cancel, and it remembers. So that's looking like it's now fully working. So I didn't expect that to actually be complicated, but it's turned out to be quite complicated just to do a binding to a list where it's effectively checking some item inside the list as an add and a save, and then bubbling these up. But now we've made a helper function. Anywhere we kind of want that behavior where part of the item inside the collection changes and you still want to fire up the UI to update, you can now just use this helper function. And actually, because we're doing this on the view model, this will be the caller name. So we can actually help this a bit simpler. So if we were to copy and paste this when we're making new properties, for example, and change this to 2, if we forget to change this here, it's not obvious and we're going to miss the fact that we need to update this to match the name of this all the time. So we should be able to change this helper. So we'll have to get rid of params because it's going to have to come after this. And then we can do a caller member name, and that'll be a string. We'll call it caller and make it blank. And now if we go back to here, we should be able to get rid of this one because we don't need to call ourselves. This can then just be the extra. So if we weren't doing anything extra, we would just do this. So then let's just make this null, and we'll make it nullable. And then we'll check in here and handle for null expressions. Invert the logic. And then now this call is fine. So if we're not passing anything special, it's fine. And then what we can do is pass in the name of export formats, but it's going to have to be inside of an array this time because it's now a list of strings. So we can do this to pass in, say, the has changed. But if we leave the final caller blank, so if we don't pass in anything in the caller, it should now inherit from the actual calling name. So if we put a breakpoint here and just check that, and then we go to drawings, click in, and we can see the caller is export formats, which is what we want. So whoever invokes it, whichever property invokes it, we're going to get that name automatically. So we just need to now update this here, do one other, actually above that, because we don't want to miss if that's not there. We want to call this with the caller, and we want to say first if string dot is white space caller, or in this case if not, then invoke. So this will just invoke the raise property changed on the caller, and then also afterwards call it on the custom ones. So that's one minor change. Now let's just double check that still works. And I guess just check there that we hit that. And go to actions, drawing. You can see it's already raising that, but if we check that, it's going to raise that the export formats has changed. So that just makes the generic side of this slightly easier to consume. So now if you don't want any custom things like has changed, you can just do set and observe everything, the value and the backing property, and that's it, and everything else is handled. So that's a bit nicer. So that's it for that one. This is the first one I came to and instantly came across this. Oh, you'll see also on here, I've made a nice little hover over tab so we can have little extra details. And if you want to see how that was done, just go to the view and scroll down. I just made an extra column in the grid. So in this grid here, I shrunk this one from 130 to 110, added an extra 2 columns, which is ultimately for these little question marks. And then inside of all of these, I moved all of the text boxes over to column 4 from 2. So the ones that don't have the question marks still move over to where they were. And the ones that do now, we can just inject an extra label on the second column. I've made it an icon only, and then this is the icon for the question mark. And I've used tooltip.tip, so when we hover over, we get the nice effect. And then I just went into the, is it controls maybe? No, styles, labels, there we go. And then in here, I just made this extra selector, so pretty simple. I just did a selector where we can say subtle hover, and if you enable that class, which is what I did, we'll fade in the foreground changes. We'll set the foreground to primary hover background first, so it's nice and dark. And when we hover over, we make it light. So just a nice simple style there, but it gives us nice little hover effect. So that's that page done. Like I say, that was the first one I came to. So I can repeat it for this now easily, and you can. We've already done the file info. So then I'll move on to the import drawing templates and macros. And as mentioned, we will come back to the drawing templates and do it ourselves. So I'll do the import files and macros next, and then we'll reconvene and look at the drawing templates.